if you recall, we've already talked about essentially what sensation is, and then which is essentially just the way that all the information from the outside world comes in. It comes in through our senses, thus sensation. And we talked about one of those senses, vision, which is kind of how you are watching me now and how that works. And now we're going to talk about another very important one, which also is hopefully how you were learning about this class, through hearing. So how does hearing work? And what's happening when it doesn't work? So this is our ear. And our ear is kind of comprised of three main parts. You have the outer ear, the middle ear, and the inner ear, which make up the whole ear. The outer ear, essentially, all it does is it helps to bring in sound waves. And if you want to see how this works, if you've ever wanted to hear something better, all you have to do is kind of make a bigger cone around your ear, and you'll see that you can actually hear things a little better. Because what this is doing is it's helping to direct those sound waves even better. And so that's essentially all that the outer ear does. It helps to bring in sound. Then you get to the middle ear. And in the middle ear, this is where you have the ossicles, which is made up of the hammer, the anvil, and the stirrup, also known as, all these other fancy words, which you won't need to know for the class, don't worry. But essentially what this does is it takes these sound waves, which hits the eardrums, and then these teeny tiny little bones take it and kind of start to communicate it. They start to fine-tune it. Because especially when you're listening to really, really loud sounds, like we got teeny little ears, it can't be that loud. And so it becomes more like vibrations almost. And that's essentially the middle ear. And again, I'm simplifying this because this is an intro psych class. You learn about this more in different classes, so this isn't the full detail of it. But then through that middle ear, that kind of fine-tuned sound and vibration then goes into our inner ear. And this is where the cochlea is. And you'll see that the cochlea kind of looks like a snail shell. That's why it's called cochlea. And this is kind of a zoomed-in bit of both the middle ear and the inner ear. And this is kind of partially unfolded, just so you can kind of see what it looks like. But inside the cochlea, there's these very, very fine hairs. And if you recall, I've been talking about it in the last module, the sensory receptors in hearing are those fine hairs. And this is the basilar membrane that goes from the very lowest, way up top. And it just keeps winding inner and inner in that cochlea. And then it's those fine little hairs that, well, there's a few theories to explain it, are able to take those sound waves and, again, translate it into neural signals for the brain. Because, again, the brain understands neural signals. It doesn't understand sound waves. If you scream at a brain, it will not hear anything. It has to be translated to those neural signals. And that's what those hairs do on cochlea, or in the cochlea, I should say. And when we speak of sound waves, there's a few things we talk about, like amplitude and frequency. So an amplitude, as you can see, is kind of just the size of a wavelength. So you have ones that are higher up, ones that are lower down. It gives us different loudness and softness. So when you talk really loud, it's a bigger amplitude. And when you talk really quietly, so I just changed frequency too. But when you talk really quietly, it's a smaller amplitude. And then we get to frequency. This affects pitch. If something is very high pitch or if something is really low pitch, that's the frequency. And frequency is kind of the length of the wave. So you'll see that things that are closer together and maybe quicker waves, higher pitch. And the things that are kind of the longer waves are the lower pitch. And then, of course, you have one cycle. And we use that to kind of figure out, what the pitch is. And then the amplitude is to figure out how loud or how soft it is. So just a little background information. Again, you don't go into this in huge detail in intro psych, but it's important to know. Alright, and with the perception of pitch, with the highs and lows, there are different theories to it, as always. So we talked about vision, and how vision had two different ways of describing how we see color. For how we hear different pitches and frequencies and all of that, there's, in a sense, three theories. And again, they all complete the picture. They all explain it. It isn't that one's right and the other ones are wrong. So the first one is the place theory. And And this is the whole idea that there's a particular place or location in the cochlea with all those tiny little hairs that, depending on what frequency you're at, different areas get activated. So if I go back, which I can hopefully do easily, I'm going forward, sorry. It's a neat preview. Depending on where kind of the pitch starts to vibrate on this, so in what place, that determines, what frequency, what sound you hear. So that's the place theory. All right, let me go back. There we go. The next one is frequency theory. So this is the whole idea that vibration, it doesn't really matter where it is in the cochlea, it's just how it's vibrating. Is it vibrating really, really fast? Is it vibrating kind of slow? And the whole idea is those vibrations then, are translated into a neural signal to, again, be perceived as a certain pitch, a certain frequency, a certain sound, all of that. And it should be noted, and you will need to know this for the exam, that the place theory is for more higher frequencies. So it seems like, the location in the cochlea, where, or the place that is being activated seems to better explain hearing higher pitch sounds. When it's explaining lower pitch sounds or lower frequencies, it seems to be more just the way that it's vibrating, so the frequency. The way that I remember this is that we're in a high place. So I just think high place, so higher frequency is the place theory. The last theory is the volley. So as we mentioned, place theory is for high, frequency is for low. The kind of in-between is what we call the volley principle. And the way that I remember this, because you will need to know all three and which ones describe which, is that a volley, when you're playing volleyball, it kind of goes back and forth. So the volley theory, or the volley principle, is kind of that in-between, where it's taking a little bit of information from both and kind of filling in the middle. So it's a group of neurons, again, that fire in alternating succession, and they combine, and it kind of fills in the gap. So again, you think of a volley of kind of going back and forth, so it's kind of filling in the gap by taking information from both. So if you can remember that, place theory, we're in a high place, and then volley is kind of the middle back and forth. You can remember that then frequency is the other one, it's the lower pitch. But remember to know that for your first exam. All right, hearing loss. What? Yes. There's all sorts of ways that we can have hearing loss. We're going to talk about it more on the next slide, but this is just some kind of word to the wise. So the way that it's not just amplitude that we determine the loudness and softness of sounds, but we use decibels. So it's a specific measurement of the amplitudes. And again, it's just how loud something is. And so you'll see like a normal conversation is about 50 decibels. That's fine. We get up to like telephone ringing. If any of you have like, your regular telephones, it's a little different on cell phones. That's 64. Lawnmower is 90. We get all the way up to, directly in front of a speaker at a rock concert is 120. Very loud if you don't have earplugs in. And what's important to know, here's where damage is, a little above 80. When you have prolonged exposure to something around, 80 decibels. However, we don't start feeling discomfort listening to sound until, around 110. So what this means is like when you're listening to music and you're like really getting into it and it's nice and loud, you can't hear your surroundings, you could be potentially damaging your hearing. And you don't realize it because it doesn't feel uncomfortable. And so it's important, and kind of how I recommend it to people, is make sure that you listen to music so you can still kind of hear your surroundings. Again, it's not as immersive, unfortunately, but it's better for your ears, because once it's gone, for the most part. Depending on the damage, I guess I should say. But still, you want to take care of your ears. And so it's important to note that, again, it starts to feel uncomfortable well after some hearing damage can be done. So be careful to your ears. I remember when I was younger, I would go and do lawn mowing, and the person that I lawn mowed for was always like, oh, do you want to wear protective stuff? I'm like, nah, it doesn't hurt, I'm fine. It was probably damaging my hearing, even though it didn't feel uncomfortable. So an important thing to note. But in regards to damage, there's different kinds of deafness out there. So again, when we talk about deafness, that's hearing loss in some way, shape, or form. So there's conduction deafness, and this is when there's damage to the middle ear. So you have the eardrum, or you have any of the ossicles, or that hammer, anvil, and stirrup. Because remember, that's the part of the ear that's taking that information that came in through the outer ear, and then making it kind of more fine-tuned to then be picked up. If it can't make it more fine-tuned, if it can't, do what the different parts can do, it's not going to make it any further. It doesn't matter if the rest of the ear works. That message isn't making it through, so you're not going to hear it, or you're not going to hear it as well. Another one is nerve deafness. And so this is damage to the hair cells in the inner ear, or the auditory nerves. Because again, as I mentioned, our brain doesn't understand sound waves. It has to be translated. And so even if the ear is working perfectly fine, if you can't then get that message sent, if the messenger, if that translation can't be sent to your brain, you're not going to hear it. Or again, you're not going to hear it as well. And this can be done, again, exposure to loud sounds, disease, aging. For some individuals, you get cochlear implants that kind of replace that job of the cochlea. Thus, it's called cochlear implants. And that can help, but only if the hair cells are damaged. Other nerve damage, unfortunately, cannot be helped or cured, at least with the technology that we have now. So again, take care of your hearing. It's very important. All right, that was hearing. Not as detailed as the vision. Again, it can go into way more detail, but for the sake of this class, and for the sake of the length of these videos, I'm going through kind of quickly. There's some more detail in the book. But now we're going to talk about some of the other senses. And then there's going to be a video that talks about the different experiments that we're going to do before we go into kind of the perception part of it. Because remember, all of this is about sensation. We haven't even gotten into what perception is. But here's some of the other senses. So we have the nose. The scientific name for this is olfaction, or your olfactory sense. The way that I always remember this is olfactory smell kind of bad, because they're old. So an olfactory, smelling, olfaction. It apparently helps someone in an escape room, so. And as I mentioned in a previous video, our sense of smell is actually chemicals. So when you're smelling things, it's giving off very, very small, you can't even really see it sometimes, chemicals, everything. And then our nose, up here, the olfaction bulb as it is, and the olfaction nerves, pick up on those chemicals in the lining of your nose. And then those chemicals are again translated to a neural pathway, because again, they are olfactory nerves. It is then translated and sent to the brain. That's about it for smell. An important thing, though, to remember, you'll understand why I'm about to laugh, because it does have to do with remembering. Have you ever had an instance where you, smell something, you walk into a room and you smell a scent, and it just takes you back? I know one for me, there's certain chocolate chip cookies, and when I smell it, it reminds me of my grandmother's house, because she always made chocolate chip cookies. There's a reason why we have those sudden, flashes backs of memories, and we're taken back to a memory when we smell certain things, and it has to do with how our brain is wired. So what this is saying is that the neural pathway, when those olfaction nerves are sending information to the part of our brain in charge of, smelling things, it actually runs through the limbic system. And as you recall from chapter 2, the limbic system has the amygdala in it, and the hippocampus, which is in charge of memory and emotions. And so we find that we then have emotions and memories tied to certain smells. So that's kind of interesting, because it shows, that just with the way that our brain is wired, it causes us to have certain memories tied to certain things. So that's pretty cool. But onwards we go. Taste. So taste is fairly simple as well. It can also be explained very similarly to smell. And in fact, our sense of smell and our sense of taste are very closely linked to one another. It's why a lot of times, and chefs will say that tasting food is 80% smell. You take that away, a lot of people, if they don't want to eat something and they don't like the way it tastes, they'll, plug their nose. There is some science in that. You can't taste things as well, when your nose is stuffed up. So they do work kind of hand in hand, and they're both chemicals. Again, it's picking up on chemicals and then translating it to the brain. And what's interesting is that when it comes to our sense of taste, there's kind of 5 main ones, as you can see here. Which I'll go ahead and start putting them up. You got the salty, you got the sour, you got the bitter, you got the sweet, and then you have something known as umami. And especially if you've watched cooking shows, you've probably heard about this a lot. But umami is more of that savory flavor, so like meats and fish and stuff like that. It's a sense that we used to not say, or a taste, I should say, that we used to not say, but now it's used pretty much everywhere, especially, again, on cooking shows where they want to bring out the umami. But these are kind of the 5 primary taste sensations that your tongue, those taste cells, not taste buds, the taste cells pick up on. And then, they take that information and they translate it to neural signals, again, for your brain to understand. Because if, you put something sour on your brain, it wouldn't understand that. It wouldn't taste it. It has to be neural signals. So this just kind of shows what the different senses are. Again, in the next video that I play, it's going to be playing on your senses and your sense of taste. But again, I get ahead of myself. And then this just kind of shows, though again, I don't like this one because it shows taste buds, not taste cells. But it just shows that on your tongue, you have these teeny little bumps. You can see them again if you look at your tongue in the mirror. Sometimes like you'll burn one that turns white and then you can't taste in that one area because it's dead or damaged. But you have, again, taste cells. So don't look at this too much for the sake of this class. It's taste cells, not taste buds. So that's kind of what it looks like. Then we get to our biggest sense. If you remember back again in chapter 2, we talked about the homunculus. And this was if we looked the same way with our senses as how much our brain took up for that sense, we would have giant hands because so much of our brain, the parietal lobe, is in charge for sensing, like touch, I should say. And this is because it's not just feeling things like, ooh, I'm feeling something. No, there's so much more. There's temperature. Is it wet? Is it dry? Is it smooth? Is it rough? Can I put a lot of pressure on it, or am I touching it very delicately? This all is our sense of touch. And the way that this works is, of course, we have our skin. Our skin is our sensory organ, by the way, for touch. And it's the largest sensory organ because, again, it's all over our whole body. And as you'll see in different areas, there's different senses for it, different specific sensory receptors. So you have like heat and cold, you have light touch, and then of course for kind of stronger pressure it's deeper down because it takes more pushing for that to then be activated. You have, again, these are the nerves that then translate it so your brain can understand it. You have pain. This is why sometimes it can be very painful when you pull out a single hair, because as you can see there are nerves that are attached to it. When you pluck it out, it hurts. That's why waxing can be so painful. It's pulling at all those nerves that are then sending these signals to your brain saying, ow. But yeah, so this just shows just how complex our sense of touch is. We don't really give it justice in earlier grades because we're just like, oh yeah, your sense of touch, yeah, I feel something. No, it's so much more than that. But that's kind of how it works. Again, you go into way more detail in other classes. For the sake of this class, this just shows that it's more complex than you might have originally been shown. And speaking of pain, which again is the sense of touch, we also have the gate control theory. And this is our explanation for pain. Because as you know, pain is not, universal. And what I mean by that is like, it's not just, oh, I'm in pain, I'm not in pain. Like, there's so many different forms of pain. You have that sharp pain, it's like, ow! And then you have that kind of dull, aching pain that just kind of comes in waves. And the gate control theory helps to kind of explain this pain. And essentially it says that sensation pains involve a gate-like mechanism in the spinal cord. So remember, that's that central nervous system, your brain and spinal cord. And then it's all of those neural pathways that then communicate with it and communicate with your brain. And then this gate opens and closes to let pain messages get through the brain or to block them off. And this is why, that you can get an epidural, which is right in your spine, and it shuts off pain from your waist down if you, choose to do so for childbirth. But there's different pathways, and this is the theory. And so this is why you can feel these sharp pains versus these duller pains, why there's different kinds of pain out there, is that there's different pathways for it. So faster ones and slower ones, and they transmit different types of pain messages. And like the idea is that, those quicker pains are possibly the more life-threatening, whereas those slower pains might be the less life-threatening, or the ones that, you can't really do something about it immediately. Whereas, if you put your hand under fire and, or you slice your finger, you can quickly move your hand away. Whereas, if you have a stomach ache, there's not really, for the most part, a quick fix type thing. But again, it's just one of the theories out there. And so yeah, this is why you can have a dull, throbbing pain and then a sharp, sudden pain. It's just a theory as to why we have these different forms of pain. But it's an interesting thought, and it seems to explain that. This is where we get beyond the five senses, because we've already talked about hearing, we've talked about vision, we've talked about taste, we've talked about smell, and we've talked about touch. But that's not it. And no, I'm not talking about ESP, but we are going to talk about that in this class. There are many, many, many more senses. But for the sake of this class, we're going to talk about two more. We're talking about your kinesthetic and your vestibular sense. So of grace and balance. So your kinesthetic sense is essentially your sense of knowing where your body is relative to the rest of your body. It's why I right now, without looking, down as I'm walking, can walk around the table that you can't see. I can tell you right now, there's a table. And without even looking, I can walk around it because I know, relatively speaking, where my feet are without having to look. That's my kinesthetic sense. I can reach around and scratch my ear without looking at where my ear is because I know, relative to my body, where my ear is. Your vestibular sense, on the other hand, is just your sense of balance. It's, it's you being able to realize that when you're on a roller coaster and it's starting to go up or it's starting to go down, you can feel it when you're on a ship and it's rocking back and forth. Motion sickness, that's your vestibular sense. And little known fact, one of the first few things to go when you are under the influence of alcohol are these senses. And so, again, because alcohol kind of affects the brain from the back up, and that sense of balance, in the occipital, or not occipital, I'm very sorry, the cerebellum. And so when you are under the influence of alcohol, these senses start to get affected. And so this is one of the reasons why, if you happen to be pulled over by a police officer, and they think that you might be under the influence, they will do two tests. One of those tests is you have to stand, you put your hands out, close your eyes, and you've got to reach and touch your nose. This is testing your kinesthetic sense, because you still know where your nose is relative to your hands, and you can do so easily without looking. The other test that they often have you do is they will have some sort of a line, and you will have to walk, sometimes with your hands out, I believe, but you have to walk in a straight line, from heel to toe. This is testing your vestibular sense to see if you still have that sense of balance. Because the idea is, if you are failing these tests, you are under the influence because it's already affecting those senses. Yeah, and to show kind of where these senses are, we go back to the ear. And we go to, essentially, it is above the cochlea. It's kind of hard to see on here, but you have the cochlea here, and it's kind of above and to the left. This is a zoom in. You have the cochlea down here. And then you have what's known as the vestibular sacs and the semicircular canals. These are filled with fluid. And essentially, these send messages, when you move your head around, the moving of the fluid in it sends signals to your brain of, oh, we're leaning this way. Oh, wait, no, now we're leaning that way. And this is why sometimes motion sickness can happen. Because what's happening when you are experiencing motion sickness is your eyes are saying something different than your vestibular sacs and your vestibular sensations. So vision and vestibular senses aren't agreeing with one another. And so your body doesn't know what it feels, and so it can make you queasy. Because a lot of times, let's say that you're on a ship, you might be looking and seeing, you're talking to people, you're walking around, you're reading a book, and it seems like everything is stationary because you're holding it in front of you, and you're talking to someone, it seems like nothing's moving. But your vestibular sacs are saying that, you're swaying from side to side. And so that miscommunication can make us feel ill. And that's why a lot of times if you suffer from motion sickness, what they'll tell you is, focus on the horizon. When you focus on the horizon, then you can see, oh yeah, it is actually going a little bit back and forth. There's also glasses you can get for those that suffer from motion sickness, and they're glasses that have fluid in them. And so you can just see around the rim when you start moving from side to side, you can see the fluid moving. And so that communicates better, and it causes the same signal of what you're seeing, with what you're feeling, in your vestibular sense. And so that can help with motion sickness. But that's just showing that, we have more senses than, the 5 that you're probably used to. And that's it for sensation. The next part of this module, again, there's going to be a video that's going to explain some experiments that I'm going to be having you doing. That's going to go over some of the things we've talked about in sensation. Then we're going to get into perception, which shows, or rather it's going to answer that age-old question: if a tree falls in the woods and no one's around, does it make a sound?